We are recording the thing so that it will be in my computer. Recording the interview, that will be in my computer file. That is. Are you hearing me? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
You are also able to see me.
I can see you too.
It is very clear, here. Picture is very clear. That's just I wanted to know as a sort of your life sketch. How your what happened is.
I'm here. I can see you. I can hear you.
So no, my son helps me from Canada. That is the. So if there is any technical problem, he will settle it. He is apolitical. He does not know anything. He just is a software engineer. So what I would like to know is, you are about 85 or 89 now, age. Can you know your date of birth?
My date of birth?
Uh,
What for?
or year of birth, just like that.
Malik, speak slowly.
Okay. I would like to know your age. So either
My
date of birth,
age?
your age.
I'm 85 years old.
85. So you were born in America only, North America, USA? You were born in USA?
Of course, yes.
Florida? No.
No. Atlanta, Georgia.
You belong to which class of people when you were born?
Which class?
Class of people. But the rich, super rich, or middle class? Your father and parents?
No, just middle class. Why is this important, Malik?
No, it is a whole life sketch. Have I sent you that my in retrospect interviews? In retrospect interviews with so many freedom fighters I have collected all over India.
I see.
We know about the class from which they have come, the difficulties which they have undergone to come up in life.
Well, I'm just a middle class child and grew up in America when there was still opportunity. There no longer is, unless you are privileged by race and gender. And I was able to do things outside my class.
You had any trouble in studies, etc.?
No, I went to 4 universities.
So your parents could join you in a good school or in a government school public school. I think every year it is public school system in America, isn't it?
Well, the public schools for the younger kids in those days were good. They were good schools. The schools no longer are good. But when I went to school, the young students had good schools and the universities were good. I went to Georgia Tech, the Georgia Institute of Technology, the University of Virginia, the University of California at Berkeley, and I went to Oxford University in England. And in those days, the schools had competent professors. They were not politicized. They did not deal in propaganda. And they were interested in truth and open discussion. All of that's gone. The universities today are propaganda centers who produce left-wing political activists. Scholarship in America is dying because to be interested in scholarship, you have to be interested in truth. But truth is inconsistent with the woke agenda, the left-wing Democrat DEI agenda. Truth is inconsistent, so they don't pay any attention to truth. So history becomes whatever narrative serves the agenda. And scholarship becomes whatever narrative serves the agenda.
So during your studies, you didn't have any economic problems. Shortage
Academic
of
problems?
money, economic problems. Shortage of
No.
monies.
When I went to school, the tuition was extremely low. For example, at Georgia Tech, which is one of the finest engineering and science schools in the world, my yearly tuition was $450. That's all. Anybody could afford it. Then when I went to the graduate schools at Virginia, Berkeley, and Oxford, I had scholarships. I didn't have to pay. Today, to go to a university can cost as much as buying a house. It's absurd. It makes no sense. When I was a student, there was no such thing as a student loan.
What?
No such thing. Most university students went to the university in their own state because in-state tuition was so low, anyone could afford it.
Were you allied with any political groups while you were a student in technology? You said Georgia Technology Institute.
No,
You were apolitical at that time. No politics.
Universities weren't about politics.
There were no student unions.
Uh,
For example, I will tell you.
No, there was some kind of a student union at Oxford, but not in the American universities. There was no student union.
No, no.
There were student organizations. There was an organization for students interested in foreign affairs. There'd be scientific related organizations. There was an organization for people who wanted to learn to be public speakers, address audiences. But we didn't have Democrat clubs and Republican clubs, left-wing clubs or right-wing clubs. We didn't have any of that. None of that existed. Universities weren't about politics. They were about scholarship.
Because here there are student unions. Suppose radical students are there. They are running with extreme
I don't know.
That is
Malik, there were no student unions that I remember, except at Oxford. And I think it was mainly used to sponsor debates. I think the Oxford Student Union was a debating place, and they would hold a big debate every year. One year they invited me to come debate, but I didn't have time to make the trip and prepare. But it wasn't about politics. It was about the subjects and sports and social activities. And I can't remember any protests. There wasn't really anything to protest.
By the time of this Vietnam War, 1960s, you were out of schools, out of colleges.
I was in graduate school some of those years. But those protests were not universal. They were in some universities, but not others. They weren't very widely spread. And they got a lot of attention, but they were a relatively small number of universities had protests. And I think the protests were mainly caused by the draft, because the college-age students could be drafted. And they really didn't want to go off to Vietnam and be involved in a war. So it was not exactly so much of the war as it was a protest of, we don't want to be taken out of school and sent there to fight, which made perfect sense. There was no reason for the war.
Were you opposed to the war, or you supported the war on behalf of America at that time? In Vietnam.
Don't speak so rapidly because of your accent. Speak slower.
In Vietnam, when the war was going, were you opposed to it, or did you support the American war on it at that time? Not now, at that time.
I think I was too busy thinking about passing my exams for the PhD degree, the Doctor of Philosophy, to be very much concerned about it. Um, in those days, there was an opposition uh, to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was associated with the dystopian novels like George Orwell's 1984 uh, or Kafka's The Trial. And we associated communism with oppression and suppression of truth or the ability to um, confront the actual facts. So we were susceptible to propaganda that you had to stop communism over there or it would come over here. But I don't think people in general saw any point in getting involved in what was initially a dispute between the French and one of their colonies. And the French hadn't been able to keep the colony, so what were we doing getting involved? So it wasn't the kind of war that made much sense. I think it was mainly something the military, the armaments industries, um, they fund think tanks, and the think tanks created a theory, the domino theory, that if Vietnam fell to the communists, it would just be the beginning, and more countries would fall, and India would fall, and the world would turn communist. And uh, this was the sort of one of the excuses given for the war, but it was unexplained why the United States was getting involved in what was a dispute between France and the French colony. Because, after World War II, most of the colonies began going independent, separate, uh, such as India. And so the notion that these were communist movements was suspicious. Maybe they were just nationalist movements. And I don't think the United States handled that very well.
No, not your ideas now, at that time.
If the
Your ideas
US,
at that
if
time.
the United States had understood these are nationalist movements and had supported them, it would have been better than to go to war because it was a communist movement.
At that time also there was the American Civil Liberties Union.
American what?
Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. American
Oh,
Civil
American
Liberties
Civil
Union.
Liberty Union. Yes, there is one.
They opposed the war, Vietnam War.
I don't know if the function of the American Civil Liberties Union was to protect the Constitution of the United States. It was to protect free speech, civil rights. It served to combat government efforts at censorship, government prosecution of whistleblowers. It was an organization that was it's become kind of a propaganda regime now. It's been politicized. I used to be a member, but I quit years ago because it became politicized.
No, you joined it in your student days, ACLU.
No, not
No,
my student. No.
Later
No.
you joined.
I was.
So during Vietnam War period, you were doing your doctoral studies?
I was doing my doctoral studies in the 1960s. Yes.
Your thesis was on this supply side economy?
My thesis was about. It was on the question of a centrally planned economy. What did it mean? How could it function? That was the sort of thing. I was a student of Michael Polanyi at Oxford.
Were you associated anyway with any communist party there? No.
Any community what?
Communist Party. Communist Party of America. Communist.
Communist?
Communist Party was
Oh,
not there.
No, I've never associated with the Communist Party. No.
No students are associated.
Malik, I don't know exactly what you're asking me. In those days, the United States was a homogeneous population. The immigration that we had was largely European. Care was taken that they were assimilated into America. They had to learn the language. They had to learn the Constitution. So the country was not a Tower of Babel like it is today. We didn't have huge communities of Africans or Muslims or Arabs or other people. We were a white European ethnic country. That's what America was in the 60s. And so they weren't different communities. They weren't different ethnicities.
So naturally, in the student days, young men, student days,
yes, I'm
student days,
speaking.
young men fall into love with young girls.
And now you're speaking too fast. The Indian accent in English is hard to
What I
follow
would like to say
unless you
is,
speak slowly.
young men, young students. You were a young student of 25 or 30 years at that time. Doctoral studies. You are a student, 30 years or so.
Yes, I was a graduate student in economics,
About 25 to 30 years.
working for my doctorate. Yes.
Naturally, you would fall in love with some girl. You will fall in love with some girl. Woman.
Did I fall in love with
love,
something?
L-O-V-E.
Well, generally speaking, young men do fall in love.
That's what I'm saying. That is the age. That is the age.
What are you asking me?
No, were you attracted to some girls and you had some affairs and you selected one for your wife, something like that?
I don't understand, Malik, what you're asking me.
In the student relations, you had any close girls which you liked, and
Oh, well, I would,
then you developed a family later? No.
uh, uh, Malik, I married at a young age.
Hmm.
I was married for most of
Married.
my student years. For most of my student years, I had a wife,
Hmm.
and I had a daughter. I had a wife and a daughter while I was a student. And as I say, it was not expensive to be a student, so it was possible to be married and have children.
And that was an arranged marriage? Your parents arranged the marriage?
What?
Marriage was arranged by your parents? Your father and mother arranged the marriage, or you selected your...
No, we don't have arranged marriages. No, she was my high school.
high school mate?
Yeah, we
So
got.
you liked each other and then married,
Mhm.
something
Right,
like that.
right. Of course, there's no arranged marriages. There may be now because we have different kinds of people in America, but in those days, the marriages weren't arranged.
So by the time you were a doctor, that is, you completed your doctorate, you had a family, children, etc.
By the time I completed my doctorate, I had a wife and two daughters.
Acha. By that time. Acha. So, yeah.
I had a wife and two daughters, and I took a job as assistant professor at Virginia Tech, the Virginia Polytechnic Institute, which was the engineering school in the state of Virginia. But why are you asking me all of these questions? I don't understand why are you asking me all these questions?
That is the evolution of a prominent man, how he evolved in the life. Whether you had many difficulties studying, you went for work and ironed and studied, or whether you had a love affair, which all these things go into the psyche of person.
Well,
And
Alec,
whether you
yeah,
went to jail at any time?
in my
Went to,
day, life was easy.
Mm.
It was an easy time. There
Mm.
was many opportunities, many opportunities. Um, so for a young person to get an education, he did not have to go into debt. Um, it was possible to be married because life was not expensive. Rents were not expensive. Houses were not expensive. Cars were not expensive. Food was not expensive. Uh, uh, Public life was safe. The streets were safe. There was not much crime. It was an easy life, and there were many opportunities for people to succeed in life. So a person, even a poor person, could become rich.
What was your first opportunity after completion of your doctorate? First opportunity.
What?
First opportunity.
I don't understand. Say it again.
What is your first opportunity of after doctorate? You joined some service, some institution as a teacher or as a
No, I
public
became
servant?
a professor.
as a professor? Acha.
I became professor of economics.
Acha.
Okay, I was a professor of economics
Mm.
at Virginia Tech.
Mm.
Um, for a while at Tulane University, for a while at the University of New Mexico.
Mm.
Then I was an academic at Stanford University. Um, and then I had a chair at Georgetown University.
Mm.
So I had a long, successful academic career. I published books. I wrote uh, scholarly articles. I became associate editor of the Wall Street Journal. I became the assistant secretary of the United States Treasury.
That is there. That is your evolution upward in the.
I had an academic life.
Mm.
I had a life in journalism. I had a life in public service,
Mm.
both in the congressional staff and in the Department of the Treasury. And later, I was on a secret presidential committee examining the CIA. I have had a career in business. So I've done many, many things.
You never stood for any elections.
What?
Any elections as a
No,
representative or senator.
I'm not a politician. No,
You never were.
not a politician. I was an expert, economic expert. I was put in the Treasury to run, to implement a new economic policy in the United States.
What about this Negro movement there? Because at that time, Negroes were very much oppressed and suppressed in your student days and those days. Then that their movement has come all over America. We used to read about those things. Negroes, blacks,
What about them?
their movement.
Their
Negroes,
movement?
their movement for emancipation, blacks.
Are you talking about the civil rights movement?
Civil rights group and Negroes also in New York or somewhere, everywhere, they were agitating, no? Against their suppression.
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking me, but let me answer it this way. Um, there has been a lot of uh, misinformation about the treatment of blacks in America. A lot of it was used for political attacks on the southern American states, the Southeast. Um, in in my childhood, there was no bad relations in the South between blacks and whites. In fact, there was a lot of integration in the sense that Black people worked in the households of whites. They helped raise the children. They helped clean and manage the house. They were just part of your life. And you certainly don't let people raise your children that you are persecuting. So now people lived separately, but segregation was largely economic based. The schools were neighborhood based. So you went to school with a class of people who lived in your neighborhood. So, in other words, if you lived in a middle class neighborhood, you went to school with middle class children. You didn't go to school with poor children or rich children. In my school, there were no poor children, no rich children, only middle class, because the schools were set up so you could walk to school. So the school was within a neighborhood. So white people who were rich went to schools that rich kids went to. They had no experience with poor white people. They had no experience with middle class white people because they didn't go to school with them. Now, for the most part, blacks were poor. They lived in poor sections. If it's a small town or a village, the schools would be integrated because there wasn't but one school. Some neighborhoods were integrated. For example, in New Orleans, Louisiana, the French Quarter was integrated. I lived there for a while. I had black neighbors. Even on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., in what's called Old Town Alexandria, now a very prestigious place to live. When I lived there, it was partly integrated. So a lot of the racial difficulties were manufactured from people outside the South using it for some agenda. So it was used in a way that sort of worsened the relations. Though I think now people have gotten over that. And one of the ways it was used to worsen the relations was to attack merit. Merit-based systems, they said, were racist. Well, of course, if you don't have a merit-based system, you have a privileged-based system. And the whole function of a merit-based system was to overthrow the privileged-based system. Well, they used charges